By and large, it's a filtering system for our universities. Our school system is essentially exists to feed the needs of our elite research-based universities, and it was forged in an era where if you weren't going to make it through the filtering of our testing systems to go to university, that was kind of fine, because you could then get a job in the industrial economy or marry someone with a job in the industrial economy, and you'd have a certain amount of job security, and you'd be looked after, it would be fine. And obviously, to a large extent, that era has gone. I'm 55, so I went to school some time ago, but the promise for me is no different to Coco, my stepdaughter here, who's 8, which is work hard in school, do well in your exams, then you can go to university. And if you go to a decent university and get a degree, then the promise that I had was you can get a job for life, you'll end up in a nice career with a final salary pension scheme, and get a 25-year mortgage, which you'll pay off. You'll be able to retire in your mid-50s, and whilst being able to make good provision for your kids. Now, that clearly doesn't exist anymore. And for Coco, aged 8, in 2030, she'll leave school. She will have the option then of going to university. And unless something changes, that involves a lot of debt. And I don't need to tell you all about that. But Coco's favorite babysitter is a guy who went to university in Cardiff. Went to school in Cardiff, got a scholarship for sixth form at Wellington College, went to Oxford to do physics, then went to Imperial to do his master's, and now he's got a decent job as a software engineer. But I asked Harry what level of income, proportion of income he's now repaying debt with. And he said, well, and you'll all be familiar with these figures, but normally the policy discussion is about the quantum, the sum of money, not about the proportion of debt repayment. And I was fairly shocked to hear it as starkly as 20 to 25 grand roughly is 9%. And bear in mind, a big proportion of his tuition fees were paid for by the Welsh Assembly government because he's Welsh. But 9%, 20 to 25. And then over 25, he's then paying an additional 6%. So he's paying 15% of income in debt repayment. And you add to that the income tax and the national insurance, and his effective marginal rate of tax is 48%. And I don't think we talk about that enough in policy terms, because to most people, taxing someone at that level, unless they're earning a lot of money, is it's just not sustainable. It's not reasonable. And what Harry tells me is that most of his friends from university, they essentially have no sense that they will ever repay that debt. So that seems mad to me. And then when I think about the other things that are going on in young people's minds in school, well, they feel like they are over-tested, and there's a strain attached to that. They may well take on that debt and go to university, but will the degree that they get at the end of it give them any job security? Because technology and machines and robots are changing the labour market all the time, and they might be qualified for a job that doesn't exist anymore. And there are then other things going on, like climate change and other pressures. And so yes, there is a mental health crisis amongst our young people. All of that feels unsustainable to me. And then when I look at the labour market, I was employment minister for a year, I see a labour market where companies are expanding learning and development because they want to grow their own. I look at AXA, the insurance company. They've abandoned graduate recruitment. They're using apprenticeship levy to grow their own. I look at Starbucks in the US. If you have been an employee at Starbucks at any level of the organization, from barista upwards, for more than 3 months, they will pay for your bachelor's at Arizona State University. If you're at AT&T, they will fund your micro-credentialing at Udacity. If you are an Uber driver in London, they will pay for your part-time degree at the Open University. We're seeing more and more employers who are funding higher education because they want to grow higher education level skills. But that in turn undermines the business case for universities, because if employers are allowing you to earn as you learn, why take on all of that debt? And indeed, employers are now starting to abandon the CV as the filter for hiring and looking at analytics. And that's fundamentally challenging to how the whole of education works, because qualifications are the currency that the whole system works around. And if qualifications are no longer valued as much in the labour market because we're using data analytics rather than qualifications as a proxy for skill, then that's existential for education. And that's before we get into what's going on in the current crisis around COVID-19 and the whole sense of, oh, we can just abandon GCSEs and A-levels and SATs. Actually, we don't need them as much as we thought. We can rely on teacher assessments and we can moderate those teacher assessments. That's interesting. We're having to teach in new ways using remote learning, while still trying to hang on to the human element of teaching and learning. That starts to redefine what's possible, and it starts to rightly have students question what they're paying for if they're not getting the quality that they deserve. And so my conclusion in amongst all of these rapidly shifting factors is we have a school system that's wedded to qualifications to prepare you for university entrance, when good advice to kids might become, actually, get a job at 18, and with an employer who will offer you a degree apprenticeship so you can earn as you learn, or get some work experience and do some learning that way. And the option of borrowing for a degree is not going to go away. You can still do that at some point, unless universities themselves change. And if they change and become better aligned to what employers are demanding and move into more micro-credentialing and micro-degrees, you might end up with a rite of passage stage after school of a year in campus, and then a university model that's more about subscription, which is more about saying, well, why don't I join a university community that I'll pay a subscription payment to once a month, a bit like my Netflix, and then I can go and have my year's rite of passage experience with a university, but keep paying for that over a period of time, where I'll get a service in return. I'll get learning mentorships, I might get accreditation services, I might have to go back to campus for a period to pivot my career because technology has changed what my education has prepared me for. And so different models of universities, that starts to get interesting. And it starts to get interesting if we have less testing in schools, because we can then trust teachers as professionals and have different sorts of curricula that are less about exams and more about learning and more about preparation for life and more about mental health resilience. I think there's a really exciting alternative future to the somewhat redundant one that we have at the moment. And that's what I'd like to talk about today.
That's great. Thank you so much. That was a really interesting intro. I'm just having a thought here, Jim. I was just wondering if you still want to go ahead with quite a structured look at each of the 4 areas that you outlined, or if you're happy.
I'm very relaxed. I'm happy to improvise and busk with whichever direction you want to go.
I think I prefer to take this in a more fluid direction and allow people to ask questions via the chat, and see if we can guide this conversation to kind of maybe at the core of where it's all coming from. So please, if you have any questions, put them in the chat and I'll call them out one by one. I'm going to start using my privilege just to ask a quick question based on your opening remarks, Jim. And that is that it seems like at the core of this change, we have, as you said, moving from qualifications as the currency of the system to, what you're saying about micro credentials and data analytics, being able to being able to basically help us find out how well someone's done at learning. I'm just wondering if you've seen this model in practice anywhere, and kind of how it works in reality, and whether anyone's actually already kind of cracked it at all.
Okay, so there's a few things I see. I see recruitment technology, which is starting to look at, like so much data analytics, it takes various data sources and it infers things from them, and looks at profiles of people. Looks at all kinds of different things in order to get a sense as to whether or not an individual has the potential. It might use some testing themselves, and there's lots of good practice in that, because there's more equal opportunities in quite a lot of that, because we know that there's a lot of talent that gets wasted along the way by the school system, of kids from disadvantaged backgrounds who aren't given the same chance that the more advantaged amongst us get. And that then plays into another example, which is something called École 42, School 42, which was started in Paris about 5 or 6 years ago by a guy called Nicolas Sadac. And Nicolas, he was asked by an entrepreneur whether he could develop software engineering talent. And the challenge was to develop 1,000 new software engineers every year for 10 years. And he was offered a sum of money to do that, and which I think was 100 million euros spread over 10 years. So 10 million euros a year. And what 42 has done now successfully in 11 different countries is exactly that. So no prior attainment required. You go onto an internet browser and take a test, which is in the form of a game, and that measures your aptitude. And so in Paris, they would typically get, say, 75,000 participants in the game, and then they will take the top, I think, 3,000, and they will come to a residential 2-week piscine, a sink or swim experience in Paris, where they're given a set of challenges, and you have to collaborate in order to resolve the challenges. There are no teachers. You've got online tools, you've got your phones, you've got your laptops, you've got the internet, and you've got a space, but they might turn off the power just to freak you out occasionally. They might change the challenge at the last minute if they want to. And from the sounds of it, they're testing resilience. And from that, they choose the 1,000 people who will go onto the course. There are no teachers on the course. The pedagogy is the same. It's challenge-based learning, and it's collaborative-based learning. And you develop, and very few people complete because they're all given a job. And the curriculum is developed with the people who want to recruit software engineers. And because they're not specifically taught a particular type of coding, like the boot camps, they have good resilience and they're able to adapt and learn new skills, because in the end, they've been assessed for their ability to learn. And their employment rate is 100% in 42 across all of those 11 different sites around the world. And it's highly successful. And now Nicolas left 42 and is starting something else where he's looking to expand out of just software into something else. The third, so that explodes everything, because that's no prior attainment. And that's a very different model of higher education. And the third model is the African Leadership Academy, started by Fred Swaneker, who is a Ghanaian who went and worked for McKinsey's in South Africa for a while, and then realized quite what a high 40% of the world's population will be African in 2030. And he wanted to develop the leaders of Africa. And that's done in a cross-disciplinary system. Again, it's problem-based learning, solution-based assessment. It's moving campus freely. He had a campus in Rwanda and one in Mauritius. He's moving away from a campus-based model. And it's one where they test aptitude rather than use qualification for entry. Very successful, very interesting model. And the graduates from the African Leadership Academy are being hoovered up by Bain and McKinsey and those sorts of consultancies because they've got the sorts of skills that they want. So, you know, I'm not saying that I don't want, if I have surgery, to be operated on by someone who hasn't got any qualifications in surgery. And I'm not saying that there isn't a place for research-based higher education at all, but we don't need a whole education system that's based around the recruitment needs of academic research. I'm saying we need an education system that meets the needs of everyone, not just those very few who are going to become academic researchers.
Okay.
Shall I have a look at some of the chat?
Yes, please do, yeah.
What would a national framework, this is Edison, if I move the chat over here, hang on, and go to my gallery view. Yeah, here we go. Then I might see Edison. Ah, Edison, very good. A hiker. Yeah, what would a national framework for structuring and validating lifelong learning look like? E.g., citizens' learning credits, etc., to be used as and when it is useful in one's life, allowing for open loop institutions managing microcredit. Yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the policies before its time, shall we say, was individual learning accounts in the first term of the Blair government. Unfortunately, the way that was set up and structured, it was open to fraud and abuse, and so it was closed down. But the sense that the taxpayer and the employer and the individual could pay into an individual learning account, so you could accrue a fund for lifelong learning that potentially you could even borrow against if it was set up right, I think is something that we desperately need. It's an obvious, you know, in many ways, I'm more interested in, instead of a universal basic income, a universal basic skills fund, you know, as a starting point, as a higher priority, because, you know, the constituencies that Labour lost to the Tories across the red wall, if you like, in the last election, they only have a future through the development of human skills and knowledge in their people. And too many of those communities are places that don't have an education tradition that's very rich. And we've got to break through the cycle of that. And we'll only break through that with lifelong learning and things like individual learning accounts, and then higher education institutions that ally with further education institutions to reach out into those communities and not ask people to come to them, but go to those communities themselves and offer learning, I think, is a big part of that. I could ramble on. Sean. Aha. I see you, Sean, with your black and white picture. Higher education, very weighted in favor of academic learning rather than skills. Right now seems binary choice between the two. How can universities deliver both, e.g. history degree with optional account? Well, absolutely. And, you know, I was talking to Cervenki, whose surname I've forgotten, who's the Nobel Prize winning scientist who is currently the president of the Royal Society, as establishment as it comes. And I said to Venki, well, at least our current siloed, highly academic university model suits you guys in academic research. And he said, well, actually it doesn't, because I need people who can think outside of the box and who are multidisciplinary in their mindset if I'm really going to develop innovative science. And that was pretty striking. So it's not just history degrees with accountancy. It's you know, I think there aren't that many things that I think we should learn from the US on, but I think the system of university credits and majoring in things and then taking minor courses, I think is something we could benefit from, because again, our system in the UK, I think, is just, it's all about filtering our bachelor's students to find the future academic researchers. It's all in the vested interest of the universities. It's not in the vested interest of the learner so much. And so, yeah, I think we should have more of an ability to get credits for doing some other things. And indeed, they might not necessarily be delivered by the university themselves. Wouldn't it be great if we had more of a mixed economy within the university sector? So you could go to the FE college down the road and get a more vocational bunch of learning to mix with your more theoretical, more academic learning to create a more applied degree. I think that would be a great solution. Robert Lennox, you're being a bit shyer. Okay. Hi Jim, more and more universities are offering unconditional offers, especially those in the bottom half of the league table, which in turn has an impact on the students' effort with their A levels. Should unconditional offers for university exist, and if so, well, I'd come at this from the other end, and I debate this with a few people. I'm doing a bit of work with Joe Johnson, the former universities minister at the moment, and he would disagree with me on this, but I think we should rapidly move to universities being basically only getting applications once you've got your A-level results. So I can't remember what the technical term for that is, but we should, it should not be beyond the wit of us to either take A-levels earlier or start university terms later, or narrow the window, which is taken up with the ridiculous amount of time it takes to mark A-level tests, so that you can then apply with your results, and then everyone gets an unconditional offer because you've got your results. And what that then does is it takes a lot of the heat away from GCSEs. We take far too many GCSEs. It's a ridiculous encumbrance. It's a huge cost. Our schools spend about £3 billion a year on tests. That's ridiculous. Most jurisdictions around the world, including the very successful ones, don't test as much as we test. It's important to test for learning, to assess for learning, but that sort of formative assessment is very different to the summative assessment that we're addicted to in this country. So if we had one set of school leaving public exams, I think that would be a huge advance for our school system. Take them and get the results early enough so that you can then apply to university with them, and boom, you get rid of that unconditional offer problem that we have at the moment. Tom Cox. There you are. Hello, Tom. I could tell you stories about Tom Cox, the former MP for Tooting, but I won't. I hope, is he an uncle of yours or any kind of relation?
No, not at all. I heard about him, and I was surprised to learn that he's the MP for the same constituency as Sadiq Khan and the health minister, Rosina Ali Khan. I voted for as deputy. I think that's quite a coincidence in and of itself. It is,
and I rate both of his successors far more than Tom, who I can tell you some stories about. How can universities help students who are doing a sandwich year find the ideal placement internships to suit their needs, qualifications, and future aspirations? Well, and in a way that goes to the heart of all of my worries about universities. If universities were properly aligned to employers and the labour market and the needs of learners, they wouldn't have a problem with that at all. And if they were reaching out into those communities that most need education, I just don't see they would have a problem at all. I've been thinking quite a lot about place-based regeneration, about what you do about Weymouth that I used to represent, or what you do about Blythe Valley or Redcar or Blackpool. And the future is about education. You know, regeneration through education ought to be the mantra. And that's not about educating kids so that if they do well in their A levels and go to university, they leave those communities and then never come back because there aren't any graduate jobs in those places. You have to build talent pipelines that the economy needs in those places so that people will want to return to those places as graduates, or so that other graduates go in exchange for the talent that leaves those places. And then I think, again, you solve this sandwich problem. You know, get universities working properly with industry now, and get more applied learning into universities. You know, as Robert, no, as Sean was talking about, in terms of, you know, some minor subjects that are more vocational, so that then you've got the option of sandwiching back out into the workplace. Shane, where are you? Shane. Given the growing importance of resilience, what role should primary and secondary need to play in instilling this skill in our young people? Well, I think it's fundamental, and we're seeing it right now, where, you know, we have a crisis that is profound and hopefully a once in a lifetime crisis for our economy, for our health system, for our education system. And it's testing the resilience of all of us. And we went into it with a pretty acute mental health crisis amongst our young people. And if ever we need the warning bells are ringing really loudly about the resilience of all of us, but I think particularly our young people, and it's not their fault. They're living in really challenging times. They're living in challenging times in terms of being on 24/7, about being essentially schooled in a compliance with what the examiner wants, and that's really challenging. And instead, we could give employers what they want and young people what they want, which is that you're collaborative, you're communicative, you have emotional intelligence, you have social intelligence. And if we had an education system that developed those social and emotional skills alongside cognitive skills, through things like the performing arts, the other creative arts, through sport, through application of knowledge. You know, we talk about STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths. Technology and engineering have virtually disappeared out of our schools. Just S&M, you know, science and maths. And there's no joy in that. There's no love and joy in our schooling. And that will build resilience. You know, I was talking to the head of the Women's Football Association, Sue Campbell, a couple of weeks ago. The reason why she is passionate about getting women into schools is because of what playing a team sport like football or netball or hockey teaches you in resilience terms, and teaches you about leadership, and teaches and gives you those skills that we need young people to have to prosper in life. It's an absolute win-win to have if we get the balance around social, emotional, and cognitive development in both primary and secondary.
Jim, I'm going to use my position again quickly if I can as host.
Yeah.
So one question I have, which I think is quite at the core of what you're asking, which is about changing this debate. I work in the Department for Education myself, and you know, you see that throughout a lot of years, the system hasn't changed much. And even when they say we're going to do big reforms, it's still kind of, as you said, of the same ilk, with, you know, qualifications being the currency. What's going to have to change for us to start thinking about education differently and doing education differently? Because it seems as though I've been doing a lot of thinking about this, and it seems as though there's perhaps a stasis or a kind of stickiness to the current system that's perhaps due to fear, because we're dealing with, you know, the system that's going to influence our children's lives and futures. Do you think it's that's holding it back, or do you think it's something to do with the kind of the system of the civil service and ministers only being in post for a couple of years? You know, what do you think is holding back the change?
I think the current paradigm is pervasive, as you say, not because ministers change too much, because actually, despite ministers changing, there have been probably 3 big influences on education policy for the last 20 years. That's all. Andrew Adonis, both as the head of policy with Tony Blair and then as a minister in the Blair Brown years, Michael Gove, and Nick Gibb. Yeah, Nick Gibb's been schools minister for the last 10 years. But, you know, he took a year off, but basically he's been there forever. And he's a dragging anchor on any kind of progress. But so it's not that, and it's not the fact that it's just those 3. In my view, the paradigm is pervasive because of the interplay between parents, the media, and politicians. Yeah, ambitious parents want their kids to do well according to the cultural norm, and the cultural norm is qualifications. And ambitious parents want their kids to go to university because that's what they did, and they're feeling uncomfortable about the debt, but they'll suck it up because they think in the end there's a payback and it'll be okay. And that they're a bit like grammar schools. Parents like it where there are grammar schools, like grammar schools, because they think their child might get into one. And they like the current system because they think their child will get the job with the hedge fund or whatever, and earn the money and pay all that. And so for it to change, you kind of got to break through that. And obviously journalists in the media all did well in education, so they think the current paradigm works because it worked well for them. And politicians did well out of the education system, so it worked well for them, so why shouldn't we continue with it? However, if employers continue to devalue qualifications, then that will erode the currency of degrees, and that will cause an existential problem for universities. And if universities go out of business and there's a rescue packages being put together for them as we speak to cope with the virus, but if they go out of business, that's a catastrophe for the communities that they're in, because there are a few, I'm afraid, who've become better property developers than people developers. And they own huge swathes of the communities that they're in. They're massive employers. And if they go out of business, it's a catastrophe. And that can't be allowed to happen. But there's something that's broken about that, which I think will force change. The universities will be looking at their own ruin and will have to form alliances with those employers that want people to be developed with or without qualifications. They don't really care. And they will then have to move into micro-credentialing. I think it's inevitable. And then the other thing that can force change is the mental health crisis. Parents who are advantaged and disadvantaged are equally affected by the high suicide rates, the high self-harm rates amongst young people. And they are and will start to question what's going wrong. Why is my child's life experience so toxic that they are going through those problems? And it's pretty grim, but it's real, and I think that might trigger change. And that's where I would go as a politician if I were trying to argue for change. I'd be talking about the experience of childhood. I'd be talking about debt. I would be talking about the currency of qualifications diminishing. The only other thing that could change would be a global health pandemic that changes everything, and you never know. You never know what will happen as a result of all of this, because if schools can't carry on as normal for the next 18 months, and there's some reason to think that education will be disrupted for that long, and universities can't carry on as normal, then people will start to experience things differently, and they will value some of the things that they've experienced differently as we get better at using those different tools and different experiences. And they might have different ambitions, and that might change things. It'll create a space for people to have a different conversation, perhaps.
Right,
I've got a whole bunch of questions stacking up. I see, Sam, you're asking whether anyone wants to unmute the chat and ask the question. So, Edison, have I answered your question? Do you want to ask it me?
Well, yeah, it was just a follow-up from the previous one. So thanks, Jim. You spoke about the currency of degrees and our obsession with summative assessment, and I completely agree. As a former teacher, it's one of the reasons why I left the profession. And I think, to what extent do you think that it will be very difficult for things for organizations like exam boards and higher education institutions to, I guess, give up that ability to be the gatekeepers of verification? Because I think that's in my mind, that's a big source of their reputation and their status in society, and they're not going to give that up easily. But I feel that that's a big barrier to lifelong learning and really opening up micro credentials in all of its different forms. So to what extent do you agree that this might be a barrier? Thanks.
The vested interests definitely are a barrier, and you've identified the two big ones: the assessment industry, it's a big industry, it's worth a lot of money, and the university sector. Now, one of the reasons why I talk about new business models for universities is, if you're a vice chancellor, you should be looking at new business models, and you could open up whole new streams of revenue out of micro credentials. And if you look at some of the private universities, they're starting to do that. They're innovating more. They're not as encumbered by expensive tenured professors, and they're able to do things cheaper and make money out of it, whilst taking the same revenue off students, and get great employment rates coming out of it, and that will be part of the journey towards change. The assessment community, well, when I talk to them, there's quite a few of them that want change themselves, because they understand that there's nothing that is relevant or useful about developing the skills in young people to sit in small desks in large halls and write with a paper and pen. That's not a skill that they'll use again for the rest of their lives. And knowledge recall is not a skill you use again in the rest of your life. They understand it's an anachronistic madness. They also understand that things like music and drama and art and dance all use assessment skills that they could roll out for other things. Developing the skills of the assessor to make good subjective judgments, which is what happens in those arts-related subjects, could be done to assess all sorts of other things. And then you have something like the World Skills Games. So these are huge events, being hosted by big world leaders when the countries host them, where you're assessing the skills of, hairdressers and dry liners and window dressers and digital skills. You're assessing vocational skill in a competition format and crowning people the best window dresser in the world. It's great. So you can do all of that. You can assess all of these things, perfectly doable, as long as you wean yourself off the addiction of objective tests where there is a clear right or wrong answer, and you trust more to a judge who is an expert. But bring it on. Thank you. Lorna. You asked a question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can.
Perfect. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. It's been really, really interesting discussion. So I work for a a public affairs consultancy called WA. And I specialise in education policy, and within that, higher education is something that I've been looking at quite a lot over the past sort of few months. So I sort of wanted to stick to that theme, and I wondered sort of what the biggest sort of opportunities and risks there are from the coronavirus pandemic. So I've just put a couple of examples. You know, is this likely to create more of an appetite for digital learning? You know, we're seeing that the sector could suffer quite a lot financially, especially with the attraction of international students. But then on the flip side, are there opportunities to showcase the benefits of science and research and innovation? You know, we've got universities trying to lead the drive to step up testing, or you know, look for vaccinations. You know, the modelling from Imperial as well. So, sort of, how do you think the sector will fare? Thank you.
It's undoubtedly a challenging time for the sector. Because, as you say, they've become reliant on income from foreign national students, and it's challenging to see that income will continue at anything like what it was during this academic year. And they then need to have a strategy as to what they're going to do about that. Now, if they move quickly and successfully, I think the brand value of the English university system is still really strong. And, you know, we see globally the growth of the British curriculum, you know, English as the medium of instruction, private international school. And that's, you know, set to double in the next 5 or 6 years. And that might be constrained slightly by global economic crash, but nevertheless, I think they will continue to grow. And the natural place for people finishing their schooling in those schools around the world is a British university. Now, the export model for those universities has by and large been to either attract students to come over and study in the UK, or if they don't want to do that, or as well, build a campus in China or build a campus in Abu Dhabi or whatever. But could there not be a model which is more of a blended online face-to-face model, so that you're saying, well, start your journey with us, to pick a university around Nottingham, in country, perhaps with our partner university in whatever country you're in, where most of it will be online, but you can develop a bit of cohort with others who are in your country who are also enrolling with us. Maybe come over for an initial immersion on our campus in August, when we wouldn't otherwise be using the campus, and you know, spend a month with us. Do that on whatever visa, you know, on a tourist visa. It's not that expensive. Then you carry on your studies. We'll organise some events for you in country for the occasional weekend, a bit like the OU model, and then come and do your final year on campus. Maybe, I don't know. I've completely made that up, but the idea that you project the brand, which is still strong, project the brand into country and deliver much more in country using online, I don't think that's mad. I think there's, you know, if I've just started advising a private university called the London, what's it called? I should know, shouldn't I? The London School of Commerce. So I remember the initials. Now, they realised some years ago, about 4 or 5 years ago, they've been going for 30, that they weren't going to get the expansion in the UK that they really wanted. So they've developed campuses in Sri Lanka, in Malaysia, in Malta, in one other country, it's escaped me. And highly vocational degrees, very successful. Interestingly, the demographic breakdown of the people who take their degrees tends to be more disadvantaged, more likely, very much the OU demographic, more likely to be gig economy workers. And it's been very, very successful. and they've exported the brand and taken the brand out to people. Now they operate campuses in those places, but they could equally use online much more effectively than they do. And I think that's one of the areas that I'll be advising them on. That's where I would go as a university, as well as what I've already talked about. Over the medium term, I would be developing micro-credentials with employers. I'd be looking at those sectors of the economy that will survive out of this crisis. I wouldn't want to be in retail right now. I wouldn't want to be in tourism and hospitality right now. But there are a bunch of areas of the economy with a digital element to them that you would want to be right now. Obviously, you'd want to be in video conferencing, but you'd want to be in a bunch of other things too. And why not be working with those employers and working with science? And then I suppose the final thing, Lorna, is I think we should think about universities in two ways. Think about them as teaching universities, which is what, as teaching institutions, which I think a lot about. But then there's their research function. And, obviously the state should be investing heavily in their research function, being quite picky about those that they invest in terms of how good their research is, but I'm sure that that's what happens. And you talked about the research opportunities attached to this. Yes, I chair a business based down in Provence that is working on COVID at the moment with AI and mobile phone solutions attached to the diagnostics, having already developed diagnostics for malaria and for analysing air samples for asbestos. And we need higher levels of educated researchers who are really good not only in biochemistry and epidemiology, but also really good with coding and really good with mobile and nanotechnologies who can bridge the divide around all of those things. And again, it's back to those multidisciplinary workers. So there's definitely a future for HE and all of that, but they need to be better at it and less bogged down in the measurement of output for a successful university professor being the number of published papers, and more about the amount of value that's added to the economy and to society in equal measure. It's not all about the economy. I hope that's helpful. Slightly rambling on there, I'm sorry.
Jim, just while we're on the concept of universities, I'm wondering what your take is on further education. I know this government is quite keen to expand the kind of vocational side, and definitely thinks that there's been too much of a swing towards universities. As you said, universities, used to be just research organizations, and now they have a large teaching wing. Do you think the answer is to develop a stronger FE sector and maybe a more flexible one along these lines? Or do you think that it's potentially just a red herring and a distraction, but actually we might even be better served using the already well-established higher education institutions, universities that we have, and moulding them instead? Like, what are your views on further education in that regard?
I would really like to see a partnership between the two. If I were running an FE college, I'd be looking quite carefully at the new powers that they've got to develop, to start to educate from 14 years old onwards, and looking at apprenticeships quite carefully. I'd be wanting to work to develop apprenticeship routes that take you all the way through to degree level. And I would be wanting to partner with universities at that degree level, so level certainly 6 and 7, but possibly level 5 qualifications too. FE are really well placed to understand the economic and labour market needs of their locality. They're well placed to work with and be themselves apprenticeship providers. I think earn as you learn is the way forward for so much. So they can be at the heart of that. And they can help employers access the apprenticeship levy that they're paying. But if they can use that to then also help with the economic development of place by building the level 6, level 7 qualifications with a university partner, and then saying to universities, you need, as I've said before, to reach out from the safety and the sanctity of your campus into the communities that really need you. And then there'll be more public consent for higher education funding, because more communities and more electors will know the brand and will feel comfortable with the brand and feel like university is part of their community and part of their own individual family's future. So bring them together, Sam. Chris, you had a question. Are you still there? I don't see Chris. Chris might have gone. But it was about broadening access to higher ed.
Yeah, we're down to 12 participants. We were at 16, so a couple of you had to go and have dinner.
Yeah. Robin, you're still here. Robin, you got a question about schools.
Hi.
Do you want to ask it?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just get back into the chat, check what I wrote. So I have two questions, but actually my second question was about apprenticeship funding. So I don't know if should we do that one first, because it's
the
topic we're on.
Yeah.
So as part of my current role, I oversee apprenticeships for a really big tech employer across the whole UK. And it's a brilliant policy, but we're just stymied at every turn by.
Oh, I've lost you, Robin.
Yeah, I did as well.
We're stymied at every turn.
It's quite a Freudian way to rejected. Robin,
because of the rigidity, I think, in how we actually use the money. Is there research around it? I'm not aware of the research around it. It probably does exist. I mean, I think the apprenticeship framework is pretty rigid in policy terms as well as in funding terms. And I think the department is pretty siloed with those people who work on skills and apprenticeship and how well they talk to the other bits. I might be being unfair, Sam, you've probably got a view that you're not allowed to say, but just as an example, I've been trying to get the thinking oiled around an apprenticeship route into teaching. There is a teaching apprenticeship, but it's a postgraduate apprenticeship. I would like to see a full degree apprenticeship so that you can enter the teaching profession. Let's say you're currently a teaching assistant without a degree working in Weymouth. It would take you probably 6 or 7 years to become a qualified teacher, because you've got to do an OU degree as your bachelor's, so because it's a graduate profession, and then do your postgraduate qualification of teaching. Better would be a route whereby you can do an apprenticeship, bachelor's of education effectively, and then enter the profession. But the policy makers in the department are really struggling with it. I think I've got answers to all of their concerns, but you need flexibility in the policymaking world around the framework, as well as around the money. And if they're not careful, there's a lot of pressure on the apprenticeship levy, and I know the select committee are looking really heavily at it this year. But if we're not careful, it'll just end up being translated into a skills levy, and we'll kind of lose the sense that this is something protected for the apprenticeship qualification, and with a special emphasis on trying to encourage them to develop young people. And there's a lot at stake, and it is a great policy, as you say, but we need to flex it. I hope that helped, Robin.
Yeah, I suppose it helps. Less hopeful.
Good.
But yeah, so if we can get everyone to talk to each other, great. And then my other question was about, going back to your point about innovative universities and kind of places innovative universities and employers, and looking at kind of schools which have looked at problem-based learning, like School 21 and some of those more in schools, and are we seeing a kind of meaningful flow through into employment or different types of employment from those, or are those all kind of funneling into the top universities, or another option? Kind of what's going on there in your research?
So I think my sense is that people who are doing the problem-based learning in schools, in the state-funded sector here, they are still doing the qualifications that everyone else is doing. They've just had a somewhat more rounded education. There's those that have done the IB, which is I think a really good curriculum, but where the universities in this country have for a long time, for their own vested interest reasons, sort of held off against the IB. They're having to open it up a bit more, but they're doing really well. And the evidence is that if you've done the IB or extended project qualification, then the EPQ, then you get 1 grade higher in your final degree score, because that's been such a good preparation for you for university learning. And that in itself is interesting. There are some jurisdictions outside of England that have more flexible, more problem-based learning curricula. It's fairly early days for some of those, but there's a direction of travel much more towards a Nordic model of schooling that I see around the world. Even in the sort of compliance-rich jurisdictions in Asia, like Singapore and Beijing, they understand that economically they need young people to have more creative problem-solving skills, and so they are looking to develop those in their curriculum and amongst their young people, so that they can feed into both their individual needs as learners to prosper in the labour market, and then also in the economic need of the country. And they're able to then go into the great universities around the world pretty well. If the IB can work, and it works really well, then you can put a qualification around all of this.
Thanks. That's really useful.
Amy, you've got a series of questions here. Do you want to ask them? I see you've unmuted yourself, so you go ahead, but I can't hear you at the moment. No?
I think I'm unmuted now.
Yeah, you can hear you now.
Excellent. Sorry about that. I think I needed to press.
Sorry.
So I'm actually a coder and scientist, so I'm a massive data nerd. I'm loving all of the potential ideas of using analytics, but I'm actually really wary of how they can be used in hiring and education, mainly due to the issues with bias. So there's a load of artificial intelligence tools that almost always biased against women or people of colour or disabled people. It can either be unconscious bias themselves from the people designing it, or the data they've used is not great, and that's biased. And then similarly, I really like the resilience training examples you gave, but they're not just testing aptitude. So if you're going to turn the lights off, or you're going to change something up quickly, then there are people with certain physical or mental disabilities who wouldn't react well to that, but would still be incredibly good employees. So I'm just wondering, how do you think it can be done to get lots of diverse experience when designing any new educational system? So hiring disabled consultants, for example.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent challenge. The sort of trite response is, it still might be better than the algorithmic bias of the curriculum vitae, which is pretty profound and has been around for quite a long time. But the question deserves a better answer than that. We have to get better at training our algorithms to embrace diversity, for one. I think we should look at some of the positives actually that we're getting out of this virus. It's fun to look at positives out of the health crisis, killing a lot of people, I suppose. And one of those is how people with things like autism spectrum disorders are thriving, how people with disability are proving that they're as productive as everybody else, and that they've suddenly got a level playing field around being able to work, those that can work with technology. And that, I think, can help start to shift some minds around, I think it's hard to see us going back to the same office environments that we did have 6 weeks ago. The employer I work for, we have about 650 staff. We have 2 big offices in London and Sheffield, and then we've got some smaller offices, in Pembrokeshire and Warwickshire and Sydney and other places around the world. But the London office, it costs a fortune. And I don't know that many of our staff who work out of our London office are going to want to get on public transport in a hurry. And we know that they work effectively from home now. They know they work effectively from home now. So we're going to be really relaxed about them working flexibly if they want to. And that will then make it, and we'll probably be better and more relaxed about hiring and interviewing over video. And then a lot of the bias around disability might fall away if we are smart about that. I don't mean that we as an employer are actively biased against people with disability, but there will be an unconscious bias for sure around diversity. And so I think there are some opportunities attached to that too, around us probably changing our relationship with cities, probably changing our relationship with the workplace profoundly as a result of this crisis. And I think that's really interesting. And if we grab that alongside how we train the algorithms, then analytics may work. And I like to think they will be better than what predates it. Is that overly complacent, Amy, or optimistic?
Actually, I think that's probably the best answer I've ever heard anyone say about these kind of problems. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Good. Well, I'm chuffed. My job is done. Maybe I should close the call now. Good. Thank you. We've covered Robin's. Robert, you had a question relating to Ofsted and changes and what the DfE could do.
Yeah, so it's sort of just like how the Department for Health has kind of been limited in terms of what it can actually do, and given that we've got for education system in Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England, and also with the move towards academies and that sort of decentralisation, if the Department for Education wanted to introduce sort of significant reforms, what sort of tools does it have that enable it to do that effectively and quickly?
Well, one of the things it could do is it could stop doing a whole bunch of things. I'm just going to turn a light on because it's clear in the darkness. It would be an amusing white paper which just set out all the things the department's going to stop doing. So, Kenneth Baker, Thatcher's Education Secretary, Estelle Morris, probably.
Oh.
Can anyone hear me?
Yep, it's not just you.
Is it just Jim's audio and video that seems to have
disappeared?
Seems like it.
He probably hit the wrong switch.
Just to let you guys know, we've got. He did say that we could go till 8, so we have got 20 more minutes. If you do have more questions, hopefully you're all enjoying this and getting some of the answers to some of the questions that you wanted, or well, at least hoping for.
Sam,
I want to hear the rest of that. My question was just broadly on the topic of placements and internships in general, just because my experience wasn't the most pleasant. I had to send out at least 40 applications and only got the internship literally on the last week that placements were being advertised.
Sorry to hear that, Tom. Yeah, hopefully if Jim comes back, you can ask him about those kind of the apprenticeships and the traineeships route. Hopefully, let me just see if he's sent me an email or something.
Hopefully he's just had an internet dropout and it will come back soon.
And yeah, if anyone hasn't asked a question yet and would like to, please do just let me know in the chat. So it'd be good to have everyone who wants to pitch in do. I encourage you to do so, because obviously he's a very friendly guy, and as you can see, it's very keen to hear from you all, which is great.
Sam, not quite sure if he answered my question. This is Chris here.
Yeah. Yeah, as I said, I just messaged you. I don't think he did mention about universities funding shortfall. So yeah, when he comes back, here we go.
Okay.
Hi, Jim.
He's still muted.
Sorry about that. The internet just died in Orkney, where I am at the moment.
We've still got a way to go with those digital technologies, don't we?
Yeah. I'm trying to remember where I was. Oh yeah, I was talking about what we could stop doing. I mentioned Kenneth Baker, and then suddenly the connection died.
And then Estelle Morris as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So we both agree. The three of us agree. We're colleagues in the law, that not only is the current school system not fit for purpose, but that you could stop the national curriculum at 14. You could abolish GCSEs at 16 and free up 14 to 19 to do things differently. I think we could definitely get rid of a whole bunch of tests in primary and trust teacher assessments a lot more. I mean, there's a massive thing that the department could do around the teaching profession, which is much more about how it develops and trusts it as a profession and treats it like a profession, treat people like professionals rather than dangerous left-wing radicals who are about to pollute the minds of our young people, which is kind of the way they're viewed at the moment. So yes, the department can do a lot by not doing some things, and then what it can do is it could use the big tools it's got. It's got inspection through Ofsted, and I do believe it's important to have inspection. I think you can do it differently, and you can make it lighter touch. And both Labour and the Lib Dems at the last election were arguing for a significant reform of Ofsted, and I think that's right. But I don't think you get rid of any inspection service. You've got to have something, and you can use those tools to inspect for different things. And you should, at its core, require every child to get social, emotional, and cognitive development from school. And you should be looking at a curriculum that gives balance and trusting teacher professionals to give that balance. And then the other big tool you've got is assessment and what you do with that, and off-qual and all of that. And yeah, you get rid of a bunch of testing, but you could be charging off-qual with regulating the assessment community to develop some of those other assessment skills where we want to do summative assessment. Could they develop more use of technology so that we can get grading done quicker, so we can do the thing I was talking about earlier with getting results out quicker and getting university entrance done quicker. And if you did, I think, and just stops wasting all this bloody money on structures. academies make no real difference. I was the academies minister for a while. It was right to take some schools away from local authorities that have been failing them for generations. But ultimately, you've got to give them back to the local authorities once you've turned them around and have some accountability. If the local authority is still incapable of looking after them, then you've got to do something about that local authority. But you can't just have academies accountable via the Secretary of State in perpetuity. That's madness. And it's very expensive. The system that we've got at the moment is ridiculous. So focus on the workforce. That's the only thing that scales quality in education. Anywhere in the world, it's the only thing that works. Loosen up the curriculum and trust the workforce to deliver the curriculum. Loosen up testing so that you can free up a bunch of time and money and get a better range of assessment so that you can assess the balance of social, emotional, and cognitive. Is that?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think I remember a few years ago IPPR did a report where they talked about introducing the idea of upper secondary, which I think was sort of something you mentioned. I think that's a really interesting idea, and and obviously move away from tests would be great.
Yeah, and looking at, if you look at a curriculum like the diploma program from the International Baccalaureate, where they have also, they've got more breadth, but they've also got things like you cannot get your diploma unless you've done a community service, essentially a voluntary work project in the community. Those sorts of things I think are really important. They're part of building resilience. They're part of building social and emotional intelligence, as well as all of the other learning that you do. And we need to bake all of that in to our qualifications. And 14 to 19 is an easier phase to do. To do that across the breadth of 14 to 19, rather than just cramming it into 16 to 19, I think is much more sensible. Much more sensible. We do also incidentally have to get rid of grammar schools. And if it's not too much of a heresy, you could look at saying, well, we allow selection at 16. You could select by aptitude at 14 in a freed up 14 to 19 system. And then you can say to grammar schools, look, if you want to be a school that carries on selecting, you can select by aptitude as an academic institute 14 to 19, but we're getting rid of all selection at 10 and 11, because that's just morally bankrupt. I'm not sure I completely agree with that, incidentally, but if you were really pragmatic, you could do it that way.
Sorry, what did you say? It wasn't you wouldn't agree with?
I'm not sure it's the right thing, because I'm not sure whether you want selection at 14, but it's a pragmatic idea. If the vested interest in grammar schools, I well remember as school minister queues of Labour MPs who represent constituencies with grammar schools. We probably don't have very many of them these days, but we had quite a few back in the day. They were desperate. They were pleading with me not to do anything around grammar schools because it would cost them their jobs.
Yeah. But if the system was to stop at age 14, wouldn't there still be selection, with all the other routes, the 14 to 19, regardless of whether it was an academic? Wouldn't there still become
exactly. So you could pragmatically say, we'll have a series of different 14 to 19 institutions, and they would be allowed to have some form of selection, as long as there was enough diversity in that system. There'd have to be that diversity so that there was something for everyone. Everyone's talents could be developed. And you'd have to have that guarantee. So you'd have to have the guarantee of a place in something that's suitable, and a guarantee of a diversity of provision in every community. And that, I don't know whether that's possible. I haven't done the spade work on that.
Another thing I'd like to ask you about is careers advice, information, and guidance. I think other countries do it a lot better than the UK. I remember in school I did one, I think, online questionnaire, which told me that my perfect job would be a marine cartographer, mapping the ocean seabed.
Awesome job.
And as someone with ADHD, I don't think that would be a particularly well suited. Anyway, so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that. Should the UK, should we start having these conversations more in schools? I mean, personally, I think that, the fact that they're like, it's like extra, it's not even like part of the curriculum at all, there's not regular conversation about careers. If they do happen, they are one-off. And I think that signals that maybe that's not really what school's about, maybe, or that's not important. I think if they were more regular and more structured throughout school, then it would at least signal to people to, hey, you should start thinking about this.
Yeah, I agree. I think the careers advice needs to be baked into the learning experience. If we are doing more applied learning along with our theoretical learning, and indeed doing a bit more social and emotional, learning more in groups, being more collaborative in our learning, then that learning will relate much more readily to the world of work. It would be easier to develop content with employers. My job at TES, I started the Teacher Training Institute. I started there, is now the 5th largest qualifier of teachers in England, something I'm very proud of, and that's a blend of online and offline. So that's shown to me that we can do really successful blended learning provision, and bringing in experts online could be part of the school provision. And in my job there at the moment, I look after some of all of our commercial relationships with advertisers, and we have World Wildlife Fund wanting to improve sustainable development education, the Bank of England wanting to improve financial literacy education, Airbus Foundation wanting to develop STEM skills, the Lego education wanting to develop STEM skills. Got a whole bunch of, got Durex wanting to help with sex and relationship education. We've got a whole bunch of different brands wanting to engage with teachers and learning. There's no shortage of desire from the employer community to engage with teaching. They just haven't got a way in because of the nature of the curriculum and the nature of the testing and the obsession with the academic, which is a relatively recent thing, I think. So for me, that's the answer. For me, the answer is for young people in their learning to get some experience of how the theory they're learning works in the real world and is applied in the real world. And then they'll start to understand and get a passion for some of those real world occupations.
Yeah, I completely agree. My thinking on this has been that, because I did a bit of research into the kind of neuroscience behind learning. And it's, basically, and it's just logical, it doesn't have to be scientific. You're more motivated, you're going to be more focused, you're going to take in more, you're going to take it more seriously when you know where your learning applies, or even better, when you learn something and then directly apply it. I'm teaching myself kind of piano again after having not touched it since school. And, I'm getting so much enjoyment from learning something and then being able to use that learning straight away. And for me, that would be obviously, as you said, you need some theoretical learning, but an ideal kind of system of learning would be, as I said, learning something and then applying it. And that's why I quite like, as you're talking about, a lot of education systems that use problem-focused kind of work. So instead of just, the theory and then testing the theory, if it's there in their heads, but actually okay, look, we've got this problem, let's see if we can try and solve it, work together and solve it. And also the fact that not only does that probably help them learn better, but as you say, it helps them learn the other softer skills which employers are, desperately looking for, which is, communication and teamwork, etc.
And in a way, that sort of goes to an amusing thought experiment around what school's for. could school be nurturing your ability to ask the right question? Not to answer the question, but to ask the right question. Because if you know the right question to ask, then you'll be great as a problem solver in a higher education setting. Because you'll come at a problem and go, okay, it'll trigger all the questions. Yeah, the problem triggers all the right questions in your mind that you can then go away and research the theoretical knowledge and then apply that back in so that you can then come up with the answer. You know, David, who's the chief scientist for this business down in France that I chair, he came up with a solution for malaria diagnostics using an iPhone, not because he knew anything about malaria diagnostics, because he knew something about iPhones, and he was a professor of mobile technology. But he happened to see someone talking about the problem of diagnosing malaria, and he could see that actually diagnosis was done by microscopists in laboratories, recognizing what they see on slides. Well, you could train a phone to do that. No one had thought of that before, but you can train a phone to do that. It's just straightforward pattern recognition, machine learning, neural network, proper AI. Boom, off you go. And that's just an example of someone coming from a different discipline and looking at a problem and answering it differently. Everyone in the malaria world just thinks, oh, well, there's a certain protocol you have to follow in order to diagnose. And they can't think outside of that box. And you have to break out of that.
And I think I think there are definitely a lot of reasons for optimism, as you said. It seems like there are definitely some barriers in terms of the systemic barriers and what you called earlier. I can't remember the term you used. When was it? It was a pretty good one about the parents and the politicians and the sorry, I've written pages of notes. But yeah, anyway, basically, there's this kind of stuff is happening. Private companies, private institutions, leaders of institutions are already thinking of ways to innovate, are testing things out and are trying. There are probably some barriers in the way in terms of that, as I said, that sticky system and other things. But at least solutions are starting to be tested, and we're going to hopefully the future it will be bright. But just as
before you wrap up, Sam, because you've got that tone of voice of wrapping up.
I do. You guessed it.
And let me just give a very quick answer to the question that Amy's put in the chat, which is literacy for vulnerable kids who don't get supported at home. I think should be an absolute focus right now for teachers who shouldn't really be worrying about educating middle-class kids, but they should be worrying about the kids who are behind at the moment. But there's a campaign that I'm part of at the moment to get the BBC, for its children's learning content that it's developed, to turn the subtitles on by default. There's a lot of science that shows if you turn the subtitles on, that helps literacy massively. And I think that's a really simple thing that we could do to help. Sorry, Sam, you can wrap up now.
No, that's great. Because I was just going to ask you a final quick question. Oh, also, by the way, I think one thing we haven't covered, which is really interesting, is the role of parents in all of this, because they're very influential on their children, particularly in terms of what their children then go on to do in profession-wise, or which routes they take. And I think a lot of the time, if parents are supported, then they're better able to support their children. I think that's also a big key of the system. I was just going to ask you, what other things that you're doing over the coming weeks and months that's kind of pushing this? I mean, obviously you spoke to us, which is brilliant, but we're a very small group of people. And you said you're having some conversations in the House of Lords with Lord Baker and Estelle Morris as well. So I'm just wondering what your plan is taking this forward.
I'm part of a network facilitated by a charity called Big Change, which was founded by Holly Branson and Princess Beatrice, which is about change in education. Holly's dad, Richard, is dyslexic, was essentially failed by education. Beatrice is also dyslexic and hated school, and that was a big motivator for them. But they're kind of pulling quite a lot of thinking together around this change. And then I chair something called Whole Education, which is a network of schools committed to the education of the whole child, not the exam passing child. And we're working kind of in parallel together. And then I link with other sort of change makers around the world on this same agenda. And then I'm hoping to feed into Rebecca Long-Bailey and her work as Shadow Secretary of State. I don't know whether she's got the appetite and the bravery for this, because it requires some bravery, but we will move in this country sooner or later. It's only a question of when and who's got the political courage to do it. And that then does also go to how we lead parents and how we have the conversation. And then there's sort of minor campaigns. So this turn off the titles is I think the name of the campaign. I'm not leading it. It's a guy called Henry Warren and Ollie Barrett are leading it. I am, yeah, there we go. Turn off the titles. If you Google that or turn off the subtitles, it's one or the other. Then turn off the titles, Henry Warren might work. If I find it while I'm talking, I will post it in the chat. But we are talking to James Purnell at the BBC about that. Turn on the subtitles. Here we go.
Yeah, turn on the subtitles. Yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah. Obviously. Yeah, there is. And yeah, that's going pretty well as a campaign. We've got the BBC at the senior level talking to us about that, which would be a great one to pull off. And incidentally, so should Netflix, so should Amazon, so should all of the providers of children's TV, because it's got a dramatic impact on literacy. But look, I encourage you to keep in touch. There's a growing number of us who want this to change. I did a 4-minute speech in the House of Lords, which I posted on LinkedIn. I've not really posted a video on LinkedIn before. I've had a ridiculous 25,000 views of that, a huge number of likes and comments, and that showed to me that there's a huge appetite for this. So politically, in my head, it's a fight we should have with the forces of conservatism, and it's a fight that we can win.
Do you think you're going to put it on YouTube as well anytime soon? I think I was looking for it and I could only find it on LinkedIn. Yeah,
I maybe should. I thought I'd just tried it on LinkedIn. Yeah, I'll do it. I'll put it on LinkedIn.
It's a really good speech. I shared it with everyone on the call. I thought it was really good, quite succinct. So
yeah.
But anyway, thank you for expanding that 4-minute speech into an hour and a half with us. We're very grateful. Yeah, it's been a good one. We're very grateful to have you. Someone who's got so much knowledge around this subject, and also we're very grateful that you were able to answer pretty much everyone's questions. In these kind of events,
pleasure.
usually usually 1 or 2 questions get answered, but this was good. So thank you very much, Jim.
Good, real pleasure. And as I say, keep in touch and good luck.
Brilliant. Thanks. Cheers.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.